Intermittent fasting is probably the fastest growing eating style or diet trend right now. The hard part is everyone's focusing on intermittent fasting with keto or with eating a bunch of meat. Nobody's talking about intermittent fasting for vegans or for vegetarians. And truth be told, intermittent fasting lends itself phenomenally well for vegans and vegetarians. So this is going to be a nice little guide for vegans and vegetarians that want to experiment with intermittent fasting. Things that you should consider when you're going about your intermittent fasting journey. So we'll break it all down from how to go into your fast, how to break your fast, what kind of foods you should break your fast with, what you should eat throughout the course of the day, how often, frequency, everything. It's all going to be summed up into this short, simple video that you can consume and also share with your friends and family. Hey, make sure you hit that red subscribe button and then hit that little bell icon so you can turn on notifications so you know whenever I post new videos. Not all my content is vegan and vegetarian specific at all. I talk about everything, but it's still a great place for you to learn and arm yourselves with knowledge. Also, in reference to this video, I recommend that you check out Boo Foods down below in the description after you watch this video. The cool thing is, Boo Foods is an entirely vegan-friendly formula that works not only on keto, but works great for intermittent fasting and works great for those that are just living a low-carb lifestyle in general. They're literally probably the first keto and vegan-friendly bar that's out there. You can get them at Whole Foods or you can get them down in the link below. But make sure you watch this video first so you know how to do your intermittent fasting. Okay, so the first thing we want to talk about is what the heck is this intermittent fasting thing for you? Just the general picture. All it really is going a period of time without eating and then having a consolidated eating window. Okay, so that's the cool thing, is you can do what you're normally doing with your diet. You're just shifting your time periods so that you have strategic gaps in between meals to allow for maximum fat burning and maximum antioxidant activity of the body and also maximum cellular rejuvenation. So an example would be stopping eating at 8 p.m. and not eating again until, say, 1 or 2 p.m. the next day. There's different periods, and we'll talk about the different lengths of time that you can fast. So now that that's out of the way, let's talk about how you should lead into a fast. Okay, so leading up to a fast, you want to make sure that you're trying to go as low carb as possible with your last meal before starting your fast. So that means the dinner before your fasting period officially starts, you should try to keep carbs as minimal as possible. And there's strategy to this, okay? It's not about ketosis. It's about trying to make sure that you are instigating the right amount of lipolysis. You see, carbohydrates spike what is called leptin. And leptin is good because it stimulates your metabolism, but leptin has to be low if we ever want fat burning to occur. Okay, so what we're trying to do here is we're trying to make it so that we don't have carbohydrates spiking our leptin right when we go into a fast. If we keep our leptin a little bit lower right before starting a fast, it means that we're going to tap into our body's fat burning potential earlier in our fast, which means that you're going to have more fat burning period of your fast than you would otherwise. So examples, if you're vegan or vegetarian, would be consuming something as simple as like tempeh or hempe or a pea protein shake with a little bit of coconut oil. You just keeping the fats high and the carbs low with your last meal before going into a fast. Now, the other piece of this equation is we actually are trying to instigate more ketones. And I don't want you to get freaked out when I say ketones. The goal isn't necessarily to get into ketosis, but the goal is to have ketones elevated during your fast. And it's simply because they preserve muscle. You see, there was actually a study that was published in the British Journal of Nutrition. And I know you might not want to hear this, but it's the truth, and we need to address it so we can get around it. It found that people that were eating an omnivorous diet ended up having about 25% more muscle than those that ate a vegetarian or vegan diet. Now, it's not a huge deal, and who's really counting? The point is that we do need to address this, though, because when you're doing a period of intermittent fasting, you have less calories coming in, which puts you at risk for losing some of your precious muscle tissue that you do have. So it's okay, though. We just get around it in some ways. And the way we get around it is we try to make sure that we get our ketones elevated as much as possible, because ketones, although it sounds like it just has to do with ketosis, ketones are elevated when we don't eat. So even if you're intermittent fasting while consuming carbs, you're still going to produce ketones during your fasting period. And ketones are very muscle sparing. That's what's so awesome about them, is they preserve muscle. See, ketones are something known as beta-hydroxybutyrate, and that gets released and produced by your liver in periods of time that you're not eating. that preserves muscle. In fact, the Journal of Clinical Investigation found that the ketones that are produced when you're fasting or on a ketogenic diet will legitimately preserve muscle. In fact, they stop leucine oxidation by as much as 41%. So that's muscle breakdown. They can stop as much as 41% of the muscle breakdown. So you being a vegan or a vegetarian, it's so critical that you get your ketones elevated when you're fasting so that you get that muscle sparing effect. You get all the benefit of burning fat, but without losing the muscle. So we do that by keeping our carbs low before we enter the fast so we have a better chance of producing those ketones. Now let's talk a little bit about the length of time that you should fast. And this can vary depending on your experience level, depending on how much you eat during your eating period. But generally speaking, if you are just starting out, I highly recommend starting small. A 12-hour fast is still great. You still get a huge benefit at 12 hours. You still get a huge gut biome reset. If you have any degree of gut dysbiosis, which I have to say, most of the time vegans and vegetarians do not. They usually have pretty healthy guts when you look at the studies. However, if you feel like you need to balance your gut out, a 12-hour fasting period is a great place to start. It allows the bad bacteria to subside and allows the good bacteria to grow because you actually get an opportunity for bad bacteria to get staved off, to die off, okay? Now, what I would recommend is advancing slowly. So start with a 12-hour fast, and then every week, go ahead and add 2 hours to your fasting period. And we'll talk about frequency here in just a moment too, until you reach 16 hours. 16 hours is the ideal fasting period. It's called a 16-8. 16 hours of fasting followed by 8 hours of eating. So this is something as simple as going from 10 p.m. to 2 p.m., right? Now, the longer that you fast, the more ketones you produce. So if you remember what I said earlier, you want higher levels of ketones because that preserves your muscle, which is so critical when you're vegan or vegetarian. So at 16 hours, you get more ketone production. At 12 hours, you don't get a whole lot of ketones. You just kind of get some other therapeutic effects. You can push it longer. However, I do recommend that if you're vegan or vegetarian, you don't really push it past 20 hours. Try to keep it in that 16-hour window. It's just a nice little sweet spot. Something that I want you to consider adding to the mix that I usually don't recommend at all. Okay, now, so this is something very unique for the vegan and vegetarian population here. There are things out there called exogenous ketones. Okay, these are supplements, and this isn't a supplement push, this is just honest, I'm not even gonna name names. There are products out there that are just exogenous artificial ketones that you can take during a fast. Full disclaimer, they do break a fast to some degree as they stop some of the autophagy effects, but we're not gonna worry about that right now. Okay, if you take exogenous ketones during your fasting period, you can at least get your ketone elevation up a little bit higher, therefore reducing your muscle loss. So it's something to consider. And if you're vegan or vegetarian and you are doing intermittent fasting, I do think that there is a place for them. Okay, especially when you consider that we're not going to be fasting all that often, which leads me into my next point, okay? Frequency. Okay, so how often should you intermittent fast? People often think that they should intermittent fast every day. Okay, I don't think that intermittent fasting every day is a good solution for anybody because it changes your meal structure, your pattern of eating, to the point where your body's just gonna adapt. If you skip breakfast every day, eventually your body's just gonna get used to that number of calories and you're gonna lose the desired outcome. You're gonna lose the shock factor of the diet in the first place. So I usually recommend that people don't fast more than 4 days per week, but for vegans and vegetarians, I actually recommend even less frequently. You should be fasting 2 to 3 days per week in this fashion. Okay, now you might be thinking, well, that's not enough to really get my desired outcome. Yes, it is, okay, as long as you're fasting aggressively enough to where your calories are restricted on those 2 or 3 days. Because at the end of the week, the total calories that you'll be in a net loss of should aggregate enough to ultimately lose some good amounts of weight. Why is it so important that you fast less frequently? Because we have to be real with ourselves. As a vegan or vegetarian, you know that it is more difficult, okay, not impossible, but more difficult to get the steady supply of nutrients, minerals, vitamins, protein that you need in the first place. When you're fasting, you're limiting that even more because you're limiting your potential opportunities to eat. Okay, so you've already gone from a semi-restricted state to an even more restricted state. And if you were to fast every day, my fear would be that you would lose a lot of the vital nutrients that you need to sustain healthy bodily function. Now, you might be a very experienced vegan or a very experienced vegetarian, which you know exactly what to eat. This could be different for you, okay? Full disclaimer there. But for most people, I do recommend that they still continue their normal vegan or vegetarian diet and then you just use intermittent fasting specific days out of the week to get the desired outcome. Now, I often say in many of my videos, breaking a fast is probably more important than the actual fast itself. Okay, how you break your fast determines a lot of the success of your fast, because at this point in time, your body is so sensitive to what you take in, you want to make sure that you're taking in the right stuff. So let's talk about how you should break your fast. So you want to keep it lean, okay? Even though I'm all about high-fat foods and keeping it good and clean with good quality fats, right when you break your fast, you really should just keep it as close to just lean protein as possible. Now, what does that mean for a vegan? Well, it means things like hemp. It means things like a hemp protein powder. It means things like a pea protein powder. I usually recommend staying away from soy when you break your fast. It means things like sacha inshi. It means nutritional yeast. If you're doing carbs, I would recommend teff. Teff is a grain that is gluten-free, that is really clean. I recommend buckwheat. I don't necessarily recommend quinoa, simply because quinoa can cause a lot of digestive issues, especially right when you break a fast. I also recommend low-fiber veggies. Why low fiber? Don't you want fiber? Not necessarily, okay? Right when you break a fast, fiber is going to wreak some havoc on your gut. Your gut mucosal layer is broken down a little bit at this point. Okay, your gut's in restorative mode. You want to bring low-fiber foods in so your body doesn't have the opportunity to ferment a whole lot and doesn't have that gastric upset. So spinach, even just a little bit of spring mix. Try to avoid the romaine, try to avoid the broccoli, try to avoid the cauliflower, try to avoid cruciferous and things that have high degrees of fermentable sugars like raffinose, which is in broccoli. Okay, so keep it very simple. Spinach, that's a good simple one. A good carb to have when you start out is a beet, believe it or not. Okay, you get a nice amount of carbohydrates that are lean, but you're not actually spiking your insulin a whole lot. One of my personal favorites too is straight unsweetened dark baking chocolate, just maybe 1 ounce of it or so, a couple grams of fat, but you get good high antioxidant activity. So here's something that's very important. While you're fasting, you have a big upregulation of natural antioxidant activity. Right when you break your fast, you have a big surge of oxidative stress. Okay, you went from being a really clean slate, clean body, to all of a sudden having tons of nutrients bombarding your body, which triggers cellular waste. Consumption equals waste, no matter what. Okay, so this means that all of a sudden you have oxidative damage. So I recommend consuming high antioxidant foods. Okay, mainly because oxidative stress is going to destroy collagen production. When you're fasting, you already have a collagen sort of deficit, right? You're breaking down collagen. I want to make sure you're not losing skin health, hair health, and most importantly, joint health. So add some antioxidants. Right when you break your fast, even take a couple thousand milligrams of vitamin C if you'd like. It can help you out a lot. Now, this very important point, okay? Do not, by any means, do not consume nuts when you break your fast. Okay, the phytic acid in nuts will chelate the minerals that you'd be getting from your other foods, which means that you are already in a deficit, right? And then all of a sudden you're chelating the vitamins and the minerals that you need for good, healthy life. You're chelating them because of the specific phytates that are in nuts, which leads me into also, if you're having a protein shake with hemp powder or pea powder, try not to use almond milk or cashew milk. Try to use hemp milk. Okay, flax milk would be okay too, or coconut milk even. Okay, those are going to be your best bets because you're not going to have the phytic acid component. Very, very, very important there. Additionally, unfortunately, and the Journal of Pediatrics proved this in one study, but then there's a lot of studies that also prove it, you're going to be deficient in omega-3s. Okay, vegans are already deficient in omega-3s as a rule, and I hate to group you into a category like that, but vegans and vegetarians generally have low levels of omega-3. In fact, this study in Journal of Pediatrics found that when they measured human milk, that there was 23.8% omega-6s in a vegan vegetarian's human milk versus 10% in an omnivore's. It's not saying that one is better than the other, okay, but the point is that your omega-6 levels are an indicator of how low your omega-3 levels are, and we need to balance that out so that you can keep inflammation at bay. So I recommend taking algal DHA. Okay, algal oil is a vegan form of omega-3 that comes from algae. Okay, so it's still all the omega-3s that you need. Very, very important stuff. So highly recommend taking literally like 1,000 to 2,000 milligrams. That's like going to be a couple capsules with every single meal that you consume during your fasting day to compensate for the fact that you weren't able to get that earlier in the day, okay? So you're going to have to spend a little bit of money on supplements to do it right, but highly recommend that you go that route. Okay, so now you broke your fast, okay, with a small meal, and you're thinking, this is not a big meal. This is something really tiny. That's true, okay, but it's just to break your fast. Now, 60 to 90 minutes later, I want you to eat your larger meal. And what this is going to consist of is if you are someone that is not doing keto, okay, this is where you have your carbs come into play along with your proteins. Still really low fat, okay? The only fat that's coming in is coming from supplements that you're taking in the way of omega-3s like the algal oil. So with this next meal though, I do recommend that you keep it low glycemic index, okay? So again, we're gonna want like things like butternut squash or acorn squash or just things like that, right? Things that are low glycemic, or lentils, chickpeas, okay? That way you're getting a good amount of vitamins and fiber in, but you're getting in a low glycemic fashion, okay? And here's a fun little hack, resistant starch. See, the Journal of Nutrition published a study that found that just by adding 10 to 15 grams of resistant starch, and I'll explain what that is in a second, versus not, allowed subjects to have significant improvements in insulin sensitivity. So what this basically means is that people that are consuming resistant starch, which is going to be things like a reheated potato or rice noodles that have been reheated, end up getting sort of a free starch. And I say it's a free starch because when you take a potato and it's boiled or something like that, you ultimately end up with activated starch that's going to be high glycemic. But then when you put it in the refrigerator and it cools, the starches change. And it makes it so it becomes a resistant starch, which means you still get the carbohydrates, but they don't spike your insulin high at all. So you can actually get away with eating more. So I recommend at this point, bake a potato, put it in the fridge, let it cool, then reheat it. And it's like a hack to be able to eat your potatoes and not have a negative effect from it. So that's what I would recommend doing. And rice noodles are great here too. So if you like Vietnamese pho or you like making some any kind of dish with rice noodles, it's a great solution here. Keeping the fats out of the equation. Okay, now we have one more little meal before you go to bed. And this is where we go low carb, high fat. Very important. We're keeping the fats and the carbs separate. If you spike your insulin along with fats, you will store fat, okay? So eating carbs with fats at the same time equals insulin spike, which equals fat storage because you're consuming the fat too. Also, something known as acylation stimulating protein, which has a cascading effect of stimulating more of an insulin spike to store more fat. Point is, we're keeping them separate. You had your carbs, now you're having your higher fat meal, which could be something like, I would say, if you're a vegetarian, Greek yogurt with some almond butter or Greek yogurt with a little bit of macadamia nut butter might be perfect. If you're vegan, then you can do some almond yogurt. Okay, they have almond or coconut yogurt. Even though I want to keep almonds to a minimum, you still have a little bit of that yogurt. Put a little bit of macadamia nut butter to add some fats. And you may want to consider adding some coconut oil so you get the MCTs. Here's why. When you're fasting, you have an elevation of catecholamines and adrenaline. It just does this. And it means that when you're first getting started with fasting, you might find that you don't sleep as well. Well, MCTs have been shown to allow more tryptophan into the brain. More tryptophan into the brain means more serotonin production. More serotonin production means something that you've heard of, melatonin. Melatonin lets you go to sleep, all right? So just take my word for it. It's that big, like long kind of pathway, but MCTs from coconut oil are going to ultimately help you sleep after a fast, okay? Here's some quick things to remember though, just hot tips for vegans and vegetarians that are intermittent fasting. Break your fast lean. Keep your carbs and fats separate. Fats before you start your fast. Omega-3s with every meal. Take some extra minerals, magnesium, potassium. Those are okay during your fast, okay? Now, when you are eating food, keep the nuts to a minimum, especially nuts that have high phytates. Almonds, cashews, Brazil nuts, hazelnuts are the ones we really need to pay attention to the most. Your friends are going to be macadamia nuts, pecans, walnuts, okay? High omega-3 nuts like that. Chia and flax also going to be good to go. Also, very important you keep soy to a minimum on your fasting days, and I know this can be hard if you're vegan, okay? But soy already has a little bit of a negative impact on the body, but usually it's spread out enough that it's not a huge deal. When your body's sensitive on a fasting day, it's gonna take those phytoestrogens and suck them up and have some serious side effects for you that you don't want to experience. So this is all you really need to know. Okay, you can take my other videos surrounding intermittent fasting and learn about intermittent fasting and the practical applications, and then apply what I taught in this video as far as what you should do differently, and you have a perfect playbook. So I invite you to share this with your friends, because intermittent fasting isn't just for meatheads, it isn't just for keto zealots, it's for people that want to change their life, get healthy, and have cellular rejuvenation. So please keep it locked in here on my channel, and I'll see you in the next video.